of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Health. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format, but as of yet, we don't have any hybrid participants. As agreed on Monday, we are resuming debate on the motion of Dr. Ellis. You will recall that that motion was the subject of an amendment put forward by Dr. Hanley and then a sub-amendment by Dr. Ellis. So technically the debate right now is on the sub-amendment of Dr. Ellis. If anyone needs the motion, the amendment, or the sub-amendment to be read, just say so.
Yes, please.
Okay. The main motion from Dr. Ellis, that given recent media reports that the Public Health Agency of Canada lost over $300 million on an unfulfilled contract, the committee undertake a study of the Public Health Agency of Canada losing over $300 million in taxpayers' money for an unfulfilled contract. The committee holds 6 hours of meetings on this matter, and that each current meeting of the Health Committee is expanded by 1 hour to address this matter, and that the committee hear from the Minister of Health, the Parliamentary Budget Officer, the President of the Public Health Agency of Canada, the President of the Treasury Board, and officials from the Health Ministry and other witnesses deemed relevant by the committee, and that the hearings begin at the next available meeting, and that the committee produce a report on its findings and report it to the House. So that was the original motion. There was then an amendment put forward by Dr. Hanley, which was that the motion be amended by replacing the words after the words unfulfilled contract, the committee, with the following, open quote, hold 4 hours of meetings on the government's advanced purchase agreement for vaccines with Medicago and invite officials from the Public Health Agency of Canada, Public Services and Procurement Canada, the Auditor General, and Medicago, close quote. That was the amendment, and there was then a sub-amendment, which is the subject of our debate this evening. The sub-amendment is as follows: that the amendment be amended by adding after the word hold the words up to, and by adding after the word invite the words the Minister of Health and. So that is what is before us. That's where we left off. And at the time we left off, Monsieur Thériault avait la parole. Donc, je reconnais Monsieur Thériault.
Mr. Thériault had the floor. I would recognize Mr. Thériault. Thank you very much, Chair. Do you have a paper copy of that? We have to have them printed. We will suspend? Do you want us to suspend or?
Okay, we're going to suspend briefly to ensure that everyone has a paper copy of what I just read. The motion, amendment, and sub-amendment have now been distributed in paper form. Monsieur Thériault a la parole.
Thank you very much, Chair. So before or at our last meeting, I was saying that I had been very patient, and I was saying at that time that when I signed the 1064 letter of 2 November, I mean, it was already been a week since the PBO had been asked questions by the press, and then suddenly we have our 1064 motion, and miracle, the minister suddenly starts talking about what we were referring to. When we were discussing this last time, our colleague Mr. Davies said that the role of a member of parliament is to amongst other things, to question the government, but to to try to monitor the workings of the government, and in accordance with the mandate that we have as members of parliament. And with a public health agency does not answer simple questions, I think that it's urgent to try and act. Last time we voted on this issue of urgency, and I recall that it's increasingly urgent with regard to the management of the pandemic. The committee refused an amendment with regard to Bill C-193, 293, with regard to an independent public inquiry. And with such an inquiry, we could have created a system led by a judge, a process led by a judge, as if there were a real capacity to call witnesses and others methods. But the government did not want any such independent commission of inquiry as is provided for in the law. But it becomes urgent when an agency, the Public Health Agency, decides to refuse to answer questions, simple questions relating to contracts. So in at the agency, Public Health Agency, is there a culture of omerta? Do they have to wait for some signal from the minister to get information that the public has a right to? I mean, $150 million, that's not nothing. And I fully respect institutions because parliamentary democracy requires respect for our institutions. And when the parliamentary budget officer says regarding this issue, and I quote, Mr. Giraud, he says that the refuse to provide information on the loss of $150 million is very unusual. Quote, and I would expect that the minister should at least be able to provide some information, some details. If he does not want to or cannot, then the minister must explain in what circumstances this loss occurred. I think we must investigate this loss. And when the former parliamentary budget officer, and I recall for those who are watching that these are institutions that are completely independent of the executive. When we hear this is a tremendous loss of money, and it is unacceptable that the Public Health Agency of Canada refuses to answer your questions on how that money was spent or lost. And I think that we should take into account this opinion, at least in a process that is valid. And I think when there might be more urgent things to deal with, I know very well that the Health Committee, the Committee on Health, is very busy. Has a number of studies underway and must finalize its reports. I've been waiting a long time, for example, for the creation of the patent medicines, and we're far from the adoption of that report and depositing it with the Parliament. But we can't ignore an event like the one we're dealing with. So I would expect that we'd be able to agree very quickly that we have to undertake this study. We can do it in the way suggested in the sub-amendment and the amendment, but to the extent possible, we have to have. I think that there are colleagues who are refusing to have a public inquiry, and we've taken much time to try and convince our colleagues. I mean, we could continue spend part of our meetings with current issues and then also dealing with this study. I think that we could all agree on that, and that would be something that would be beneficial for everyone, especially Canadians who have the right to expect explanations. And Chair, the management of the pandemic, I was here right from the beginning in the committee, and I think there were Mr. Pawlowski as well, Mr. Davies. We lived through these meetings where, for a week or more, the committee was the only committee that was meeting, and then the Committee on Finance started to meet as well. So we could see very well that we were in an emergency management situation, and in this the context of this emergency management, I was very aware of how we could respect our responsibilities. And when I agreed to become a member of this committee, the first thing I said was that I would not indulge in petty politics with regard to health. I wanted to be very responsible. And when the pandemic occurred, and I would challenge anyone around the table to question anything that I said around during these meetings that might be controversial or partisan. And today I'm taking the floor not to delay our work, but rather to try and change direction. It's true that we have a lot of work to do, but it's also true that the Standing Committee on Health must also be responsible for monitoring spending by the government and the Public Health Agency, and I regret that there doesn't seem to be any possibility of a public inquiry. And we live this very situation, the pandemic situation within the committee. And it was very important that we develop vaccines, for example, during this situation. And Mr. Pawlowski said to us last time that the deadline for fast-tracking development of a vaccine, there is even if we all worked together, at first we were told it would be 2 to 5 years before we get a vaccine, and yet in the end we had vaccines faster. And I remember, Chair, how the opposition at the time was pressuring the government to reserve vaccines. I remember that. To have the broadest possible availability of vaccines, because he didn't know which one would be the best or the most effective. And I don't want to go back to what a commission of inquiry could do, but I remember that when we met with the scientists at the beginning of the pandemic, they said it was great. We're all sharing information. Everybody's working together. And I was thinking to myself, will it be like that right till the end of the pandemic? Or once we've found a vaccine, will we continue to share all our information with the vaccines all across the planet? Is that what happened? I would have thought that there would have been a coordination by the WHO and that by the rich countries, so that we would not have to live through what happened. And I think that we lost an opportunity as humans, and the rich countries, of course, bought up the vaccines, and there was pressure. The opposition was pressuring the government to get these vaccines. Why are there so other countries that have vaccines and we don't have vaccines yet? And I think that led to purchases of vaccines before Christmas that cost a lot more than other countries were paying. And you can see that I remember something that we were discussing when all the parties were discussing the possibility of lifting patent protections. Why are there various different variants of vaccines? Because there were areas on the planet that weren't vaccinated, and so there were variants of the virus that also developed, and so there were different vaccines for different variants, and so sometimes vaccines were sent to areas that weren't organized for vaccination, and often vaccines that were almost beyond their expiry date, and so this has made it difficult to vaccinate people for many countries because of patents and others. And how did we be beyond partisanship? How did we draw the lessons from that we should have? I mean, and I think that the people don't really want to be nonpartisan and identify the problems, the errors, and that's something that a public independent commission and a public inquiry could do. And what would have happened if we had a worldwide information network? How could we have a situation that was inefficient, and there were countries that were unable to protect their populations well? There are a lot of things that we could have done with a public inquiry, and I mean, we can't draw any conclusions, of course, because there won't be any inquiry, because there's no will for that. And so in that kind of a situation, everything becomes urgent. You have to do everything a la carte, because if we, rather than doing a public inquiry, every time that a situation arises where there's any questioning of what has happened, then there are certain branches of the government that tend to lean towards being opaque rather than transparent, and so we will end up with deadlines that are are badly managed, and we won't be able to shed light on this kind of situation years later without a public inquiry. And the key word and the key lesson of this, and the reason why I'm speaking to you today, and I'm not wanting to filibuster or anything else. I think that we have to act as far as possible to ensure transparency. And we lived this during the pandemic, unfortunately, Chair. The day when citizens no longer trust their institutions, we will have no one to blame but ourselves, because we weren't able to seize the initiative and to ensure the good workings of these institutions. And so some people might think that I'm indulging in some political philosophy, a lecture on political philosophy, but and rather than saying, well, the Bloc or the Conservatives, the NDP want to delay some other study that's very important. That's not what's happening here. I'm just trying to say what would happen if there could be some consensus, and that consensus would be, can we have hybrid meetings where we can ensure that the agreements that we have, the agreements with regard to our work in camera, can stay the same as when the meeting is public, because that was a problem we had last week. Maybe in creating a work plan, maybe we can follow our calendar, take part of our meetings, maybe increase the number of meetings we have. I'm willing to work more. I've been here since 5 o'clock in the morning, and maybe we can work very, very hard, just as we worked very hard during the pandemic. We worked every day nearly, and that's why we're here, and we like to do that. So I would like to come to some kind of agreement on being able to meet our objectives between now and Christmas based on our calendar. We can do that while still trying to shed light on this situation by hearing witnesses, the witnesses we've identified, and very honestly, I would like there to be consensus. And if I understand Mr. Davies and what he suggested last week, Mr. Ellis and Mr. Hanley, perhaps we could do 3-hour meetings, work for 2 hours to make progress on our important files, the reports that we have. And the last hour would be for a key witness that we could question to shed light on this unfortunate revelation about this, and also address this attitude of, well, we're not going to tell you anything, we're not going to give you information, and that it's urgent. We have to do something, and I think that if the parliamentary budget officer didn't know or couldn't explain, couldn't understand why the information wasn't provided, that shows that it's a problem. So if there is this culture, that we have to shed light on this culture of being opaque and not transparent, and we can't say that the $150 million didn't help in the creation of a vaccine, but there was a vaccine. They did create a vaccine, but it couldn't be commercialized because of the problem of the interpretation of the convention. But at least we, as MPs, we have to shed light on the situation, and This would also send a message to all organizations and institutions that work under the umbrella of the Ministry of Health. They should know that the members of this committee will not let anything just pass them by. And if there's any kind of emergency or problem like we've just lived through, we will take time in our work to find the truth. That's our duty. That's why we were elected. And I'm going to stop there, Chair, because I think that in listening to colleagues, there seems to be a consensus that's taking shape. And I don't want to be criticized for delaying the work of the committee just for my own purposes. So if I have anything to add, I will ask for the floor again in reaction to anything that might be said, anything that comes to my mind in reaction. But with regard to the amendment, the sub-amendment, and if the colleagues are in agreement to go forward, I think my proposal would be to go along with the amendments as proposed by Mr. Hanley, and now myself. Thank you, Chair. Thank you very much, Mr. Thériault.
Other speakers on the speakers list for the sub-amendment. So are we ready for the question on the sub-amendment? Okay. So the sub-amendment moved by Dr. Ellis is that the amendment be amended by adding the word hold, after the word hold, the words up to, and by adding the word in, after the word invite, the words the Minister of Health and. All those in favor of the sub-amendment, please raise your hand. The sub-amendment is adopted. The debate is now on the amendment as amended. Is there any discussion on the amendment as amended? Is everyone clear what we're talking about? Go ahead, Mr. Perkins.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for indulging me as an associate member of this committee. My normal role, besides sitting with Mr. Henley on fisheries, is as vice chair of the industry committee, and I've had a motion for a study on Medicago on the industry committee since the spring, but legislation takes precedence, and we were dealing with Bill C-34, the Investment Canada Act changes, and now Bill C-27, the Privacy and Artificial Intelligence Bill. So we've not had a chance to get to the motion, which is why I think the motion here before the committee is so important. And Industry Committee had done an examination initially, which was tabled in June, but it was actually started in the last Parliament on the response to COVID-19, as I think in terms of vaccines, as I believe this committee did. And I think it's important to understand that I believe, there is not only the Minister of Health issues with regard to this study, but there is a large industry role, and unfortunately the Industry Committee doesn't have time to discuss it. But in our report, in the appendix, you'll note from the report that was tabled in June 14th from the Industry Committee in the House that the agreement with Medicago was signed on October 23rd, 2020 to purchase up to 76 million doses of the vaccine. A vaccine which Health Canada had approved and to which the government initially committed 200 and I think it was up to $223 million through a couple of funds to develop a non-mRNA vaccine, I think plant-based vaccine, which they successfully did and I think got the Health Canada approval. The interesting thing about that is that I think one of the reasons why I believe the committee needs to study it is because of the various reasons that are not clear to us as to why not a single vaccine was produced, and that contract was signed for $76 million. A great deal of provincial and federal government money had gone into actually creating that vaccine plant in Quebec City 10 years or so ago to produce vaccines. And in the case of this, my understanding from everything I've seen, read, and we've heard is that it was a successful vaccine with a fairly high efficacy rate. And but this investment was made and seems to have not gone anywhere, mainly because I think the World Health Organization has a policy not to endorse products that are produced by companies that have any kind of tobacco manufacturing involvement. Of course, I think it was Philip Morris had a 40% ownership, with Mitsubishi having the remainder. So one of the questions that would puzzle me, that I'd love to ask both the health minister and the industry minister going in before such a contract was signed, was why would you sign such a contract or even invest $223 million or up to $223 million of taxpayer money developing a vaccine with a company that you knew the WHO would not endorse to be promoted around the world. So it would leave it essentially as a Canadian domestic market vaccine. So I think there's a lot of questions to be asked around that particular question. And what was the thinking and leading up to that? We know the thinking to try and develop, as MP Theriault said, the domestic vaccine manufacturing capacity. A lot of money was going into it in a very intense time in the world, in this country. But the question is, in choosing to make it with this particular one, it looked to me anyway that it was doomed for failure in terms of its ability to actually, if successful, be a vaccine that would be acquired by other countries, because that ultimately would be the goal in addition to our own, because without a sort of WHO good housekeeping seal of approval, it was unlikely to have any success in its sales. So I think some of the motivation obviously behind that is, in business we call it a sunk cost once it's done, right? You can't get it back. But in this case, the sunk cost is in, so let's buy some of the vaccines and contract with it. Now, there's an incredible amount of taxpayer money that went into this. Where are the patents? Who owns the patents? Where have they gone? The inability of this organization, for whatever reason, to produce the vaccines in this plant that was set up where 400 people worked, looked like it had a ray of light in December last year when Mitsubishi bought out Philip Morris and thought, okay, well, maybe when that happened, I thought, okay, this is good news. Maybe now this great taxpayer-funded vaccine will be able to be produced and marketed around the world now that it no longer has a tobacco company ownership structure. There are rumors out there of what Mitsubishi paid for that. Some have said it's as low as about $14 million, which is incredible given that it had almost $200 million of federal taxpayer money in with patents on a successful vaccine. Nonetheless, we're all lead a public life, in elected life, so we're all optimists by nature, or we wouldn't be doing this job. And so I think we held out hope that somehow that would be seen as a step forward. But lo and behold, what happened 6 weeks later? 6 weeks later, Mitsubishi shut the company down, threw 400 people in Quebec out of work after all that taxpayer money, and then started this dance of the questions that we started to ask. Well, what's happened? There's this contract that is there to produce up to 76 million vaccines. That I believe the cost was $20 per vaccine. So what are we on the hook for as a country to pay for a vaccine that was never produced? And where did all that investment in that IP go? I suspect we don't know the answers to that, and whether or not Mitsubishi has chosen to actually sell the Canadian financed patents for a plant-based COVID vaccine somewhere in the world. We don't know that. We haven't had them before this committee, haven't had them before industry committee. And this committee has the opportunity, perhaps with its agenda, to do that where we don't in industry. And I would be urging members to take a look at that, because it seems to me there's at least two flaws in this process. The first flaw is that there wasn't any protection of Canadian taxpayers when $200 million was committed in a contract to develop the vaccine in the first place. No issues around the taxpayer claim on the patents if something went south, that somehow as the financier of this, that we either through university-owned patents, through the rights of the granting councils, through the SIFT program, or whichever ICED program paid for this, because I believe the money came out of ICED, that we were so poor, obviously, at negotiating contracts that we didn't get an ownership stake in that, or any protection for the taxpayer if, for some example, as they must have known going in, that it would have trouble being marketed because of the Philip Morris ownership, that there wasn't some protection for the taxpayer from that company in the contract that either gave us the money back from Philip Morris and Mitsubishi for the investment, or had, in the case of the situation that arose, the fact that the taxpayer would actually own the patents, and so that it couldn't leave this country and couldn't be sold by a foreign multinational. But it appears that's the situation we're in. But if that wasn't bad enough, obviously the cancellation clauses were clearly non-existent in the contract to actually buy the $76 million or 76 million doses of the vaccine that were never produced, because we now are on the hook for another $150 million for something that was never made. Thin air, vapor, nothing. $150 million for not even an empty vial. So $200 million into developing the vaccine, $150 million for absolutely nothing, 400 people in Quebec City out of work, and Mitsubishi gets to walk away with all the patents and all of the potential to sell that for the small price of a few $1 million buying out Philip Morris. That's the way it appears. Maybe that's not the case. Maybe the witnesses could actually shed some light onto these contracts. Maybe officials could explain to us why they signed contracts that appear to leave the Canadian taxpayer with nothing, with absolutely nothing but the bill, and leave a Japanese company with an innovative Canadian patented technology. And again, because we don't have the ability to do this in finance, we would like to get this committee, or I should say in industry, we would like to get this committee to examine these things. And that's why I think Dr. Ellis put forward the motion in the first place. And I would urge that our committee members not only vote on the amendment as amended. I guess I think we need probably not to limit ourselves. Personally, I wouldn't limit ourselves to 4 meetings or 6 meetings. I think you got to follow the evidence and then get to the main motion so that the committee gets this on the agenda. So that's my opening. I'll leave it at that for members to consider. But the numbers add up to quite a large loss to the Canadian taxpayer. To me, it's a bit of a scandal. I hope it's not. I hope we can actually get those patents back. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Is there any further debate on the amendment? Seeing none, are we ready for the question? So the amendment as amended is that the motion be amended by replacing the words after the words unfulfilled contract, the committee, with hold up to 4 hours of meetings on the government's advance purchase agreement for vaccines with Medicago, and invite the Minister of Health and officials from the Public Health Agency of Canada, Public Services and Procurement Canada, the Auditor General, and Medicago. All those in favor of the amendment, please raise your hands. All those opposed, the amendment is carried. The debate is now on the motion as amended. Ms. Sidhu.
Mr. Chair, I have a minor but important amendment to move, which is going to add Innovation, Science and Economic Development Canada after Public Service and Procurement. Adding ISED will allow us to hear from the department who spend money on and the R&D research for the vaccine of Medicago. You want me to read the full text or just want to add, Innovation, Science and Economic Development Canada?
As another witness.
Yeah, as another witness.
Okay, and so if you, do you mean officials from?
Yes, Mr.
Okay.
Chair.
Okay. All right. The amendment is in order, so it is to insert after Public Services and Procurement, Innovation, Science, and Economic Development Canada. So the debate is now on that amendment. I see Dr. Kitchen, Dr. Ellis.
Thank you. Just for clarification, for clarification, when you're asking for the officials from there, you're also asking for the minister as well, correct?
No, just officials, because any question they can answer that because,
Then I would like to maybe do a sub amendment to add the minister there as well, so the minister can be, because ultimately it's to the minister who's responsible for the agency. I'm okay with having what you're proposing, but I think the minister should be able to be there to respond to it as well.
Mr. Chair.
I just want to take advice on whether that is, in fact, a sub-amendment or whether we would need to take it on as a separate amendment. Just hold 1 second there. Okay, so we have a sub-amendment that is in order to add to Ms. Sidhu's amendment, the minister and officials from, I think is the import of what you're trying to do, Dr. Ellis, and I recognize you, Ms. Sidhu. Oh, sorry, no, I don't. After Dr. Kitchen is Dr. Ellis. Are you ceding the floor now, sir?
Yes.
Dr. Ellis and then Ms. Sidhu.
Thank you very much, Chair. And I think that I think the clarity with which Mr. Perkins brought the issue in front of the committee, hopefully everybody was paying close attention to that. I think that this is very clearly a decision which did require the input of the Minister of ISED, and I think having the Minister here would be absolutely essential. And I would urge this committee to move forward with the business we have at hand. I do also believe, as my bloc colleague said, we have multiple things that we need to get to, important studies that need to get done. And I would suggest to my colleagues that we would have some suggestions of how we can get forward to those things if we can move forward in an expeditious manner and deal with this in front of us. Thank you.
Ms. Sidhu.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, let's start with the Minister of Health because we have 4 hours. We have lots of witnesses and ISED officials are coming and we can ask them questions and then we always can decide later on that. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Is there any further debate on the sub-amendment? Mr. Davies and then Mr. Perkins.
Just to be clear, I just want to clarify, the sub-amendment is simply to add Innovation, Science and Economic Development Canada or the minister and their officials from ISED?
The sub-amendment
That is
is
the
to,
sub-amendment?
is to add the word minister and officials from. The main amendment is Innovation, Science and Economic Development Canada.
Thank you, I understand.
Okay. Mr. Perkins, please.
So just in support of what Dr. Ellis said, and I won't belabor it, just that I think it's really important to have the minister because ultimately he was the person who had to sign off as a minister, he's been the minister for 34 months, on these contracts. And officials would have made the recommendations. He's ultimately accountable for the $150 million that's being paid out now to the contract. He's accountable for the $223 million that was committed to go in. And so while the Minister of Health has role in the process of whether or not it's the vaccine works, the Minister of Industry is the one that had to fund it. Officials aren't accountable for the dollars. Ultimately, it's the minister. They would have made the recommendation. So I would encourage members, please, to keep the minister there of industry. We won't have a chance, as I said, to look at this in industry. We're going to be dealing with PEPITA and C27 until February or March. So,
Any further discussion on the sub-amendment? Are we ready for the question? So to be clear, the import of the sub-amendment is to add the Minister of Innovation, Science, and Economic Development to the motion, to the witnesses. All those in favor of the sub-amendment, please raise your hand. All those opposed, the sub-amendment is carried. That moves us to Ms. Sidhu's amendment as amended. And the import of that is to have officials and the minister from ISED added to the list of witnesses. Any discussion on that? All those in favor of the amendment? Hands, please. It's unanimous. So now we're on to the main motion as amended. Is there any discussion on the main motion? Mr. Davies and Mr. Johari.
Hi, thank you, Mr. Chair. More in the nature of a question. Between the original motion of Dr. Ellis and the amendment of Dr. Hanley and the various sub-amendments, there's been some movement in who we're calling. And I noticed that in Dr. Hanley's amendment, they added the Auditor General. And I don't think the Auditor General is in the original motion. And I'm legitimately curious about what role or testimony the Auditor General may have in this. I'm not sure if some of my colleagues could maybe advise on whether the Auditor General had weighed in on this in some way or had any involvement in this matter. If they did, then that's fine. But I'm just curious if anybody with deeper knowledge of the Auditor General's involvement than I can maybe elucidate it. Because if the Auditor General did not have any involvement, then I may end up moving that we remove the Auditor General. But if there is a reason to have the Auditor General here, then I'd like to hear that.
Okay, Mr. Johari and then Dr. Kitchen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, first of all, I'd like to welcome MP Perkins. I think that was the first time that we heard the evidence presented on this matter very clearly. And I'd like to thank you for a number of times making a reference to the investment that it was made and the result that it yielded and the money that we don't understand why it was paid. You talked about the patent ownership. Great question to ask. I'd love to know that. You talked about protection for the taxpayer. I'd love to know that. You talked about walkaway clauses. We have PSPC reviewing these documents. We must have had considered this with other vaccines. I'd like to actually know whether we entered into the same contract for other vaccine producers. You talked about the Philip Morris ownership and how $220 million or potentially $173 million or $200 million got decreased to $14 million. I'd love to know that. And, cancellation clauses. Great. But what that helped me was it crystallized what I was trying to point out in our last meeting, that there is a preamble. There's a preamble that I think, if used, will diminish all the points that you highlighted, and I have carefully noted here. So I like to actually move the motion that we delete the following: that given recent media reports that the Public Health Agency of Canada lost over $300 million on an unfulfilled contract, the committee undertake a study of the Public Agency of Canada losing over $300 million taxpayer money for an unfulfilled contract and replace it with the following: that the committee study the vaccine advance purchase agreement with Medicago, that the committee hold up to 4 hours of meeting on the government advance purchase agreement for vaccine with Medicago and invite the Minister of Health and the rest of all these sub-amendments that we've done. It's just that preamble, I believe, is not representing the evidence that was talked. I don't want to talk about facts because we don't have facts. But the evidence that's before us, and you clearly, pointed all of them out, I think is not fairly represented in the preamble. So I think the preamble, I move that the preamble be removed and it be replaced with the committee study the vaccine advance purchase agreement with Medicago, and the rest is as it was amended. Thank you.
Amen.
Could he clarify again?
Sorry.
If you want to read this is what I have.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Johari, and sorry for that pause, but I wanted to get straight just exactly where we stand in terms of the amended motion, because it seems to me that we may have, that your proposed amendment arises from some confusion over what has already been amended. So that is to say that what we are now debating is the amended and sub-amended motion. So what we are now debating is this: that given recent media reports that the Public Health Agency of Canada lost over $300 million on an unfulfilled contract, the committee hold up to 4 hours of meetings, and so on. So the preamble, as to use your words, the preamble that is still retained and is still before the committee and is the subject of this debate is that given recent media reports that the Public Health Agency of Canada lost over $300 million on an unfulfilled contract, because Dr. Hanley's amendment basically changed all the words after that, or after the committee, the 2 words later. So it strikes me that the amendment that you just proposed, Mr. Johari, there's a bit of an overlap there. So what I want to be clear on what the amendment is, and that we're not amending something that's already been amended. So if you could just repeat again exactly what is the nature of the amendment you want to propose, and see if we can work through this.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm replacing that given recent media report that the Public Health Agency of Canada lost over $300 million on an unfulfilled contract. And I believe what you're saying is that the committee undertake a study of Public Health Agency of Canada losing over $300 million in taxpayer
That's already
money.
gone.
That's already gone. Okay. So what I'm suggesting then is as follows. That given recent media reports that the Public Health Agency of Canada lost over $300 million on an unfulfilled contract to be replaced by that the committee study the vaccine advance purchase agreement with Medicago and the rest as is. As amended.
Okay. So, Mr. Johari, here's the problem with the amendment that you have proposed, if adopted, would mean that what we are going to be considering is the committee study the vaccine advance purchase agreements with Medicago. The committee hold up to 4 hours of meetings on the government's advance purchase agreement for vaccines with Medicago, and invite the Minister of Health. So I guess what I'm saying to you is what you are proposing to add for wording is already there, because it was contained in Dr. Hanley's amendment. And I'm sure that's not your intention. I believe your intention is to remove the preamble. The words that you want to replace it with are already included in Dr. Hanley's amendment, and therefore the motion that we are currently debating.
You are 100% right, Mr. Chair.
I never get tired of hearing that.
At the time that I made the amendment, I wasn't sure whether Mr. Hanley's amendment will go through. Therefore, I'm just asking for the preamble to be removed because I think this is a very worthy study for us to do.
To be clear, the amendment that is now being proposed is to delete the words "given recent media reports that the Public Health Agency of Canada lost over $300 million on an unfulfilled contract." So I think that's what you're saying, Mr. Johari, which would leave us with that the committee hold up to 4 hours of meetings on the government's advance purchase agreement for vaccines with Medicago, and then it goes on to the witness list. Okay, is that the amendment? Is to take out the words?
Yeah, I think our side wants about 2 minutes suspension.
I think that's a great idea that we have a huddle and get all this figured out. I think it may move more expeditiously once everyone knows what we're talking about. Mr. Thériault.
Chair, could we take advantage of this to have something written in French as well? Yes, thank you.
Mr. Chair, do we have to use good? an updated version on paper of the motion as amended, so that is the subject of the debate at this time, has been circulated. The amendment proposed by Mr. Johari is that the words, given recent media reports that the Public Health Agency of Canada lost over $300 million on an unfulfilled contract, be deleted. Correct?
Yes.
So the debate is now on that amendment. Dr. Ellis.
Well, thank you very much, Chair. You know, I think it's clear to everyone on this side that this is an attempt at a gross and negligent cover-up by our Liberal colleagues. Sadly, you know what? We all know on this side that $300 million of taxpayers' money was wasted and, again, was hidden deep in a document that I brought last time of about 4 inches thick, somewhere around 3/4 of the way through it in font of about 6 or 8. And this smells of exactly the same ilk. And Canadian taxpayers can no longer stand for this. The sunny ways and transparency of this Liberal government have gone long and far and deep into some dark, dank cave. The sadness that that brings for taxpayers who today suffer with the inability to feed themselves, keep a roof over their heads, and pay for home heating fuel is evident to everyone here. Everyone who has constituents who lives in some part of this country that it soon will be very cold, colder in some places than other, and we know that perhaps other than for Mr. Davies, the rest of us will be very cold this winter. That being said, losing $300 million and then trying to hide $150 million of that, and now trying to limit the study such that the scope of it will be incredibly narrow, once again, is just a method to lose transparency, which is the spirit of what we were trying to get to here in this committee. And that is something that we are all here to do as representatives of Canadians. And I know that every Liberal member on that side of the House is faced with constituents having affordability problems. Why do I know that? Mostly because we hear that when we're not sitting here in public meetings. We hear that that their constituents too are also suffering, whether they want to admit that in public or not. We know that the potential for flip-flop with respect to that from our Liberal colleagues is very, very significant. So we on this side will not stand for the deletion and limitation of this study. And once again, as I made the plea to our committee members before, there is significant amount of work that needs to be gotten to by this committee. We know that Mr. Davies has a women's study, which he's made it very clear has not been studied in this committee for decades, and it is something that we need to get to. And these tactics that we now see trying to cover up $150 million and also trying to limit the scope of the study as to where the money went and how it was lost in such an incredible fashion, again, are intolerable over here. So to hear our colleagues wanting to, once again, limit this study is intolerable, and it's also impeding the work of this committee moving forward on important topics, as I said, such as the women's health study, such as the opioid study, such as finishing the study on breast implants and the children's health study, et cetera. So I would invite my Liberal colleague to withdraw his motion, and we could then vote on this and get to the important work of the committee, which we know we have to get to as soon as possible. Thank you, Chair.
Dr. Hanley?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to perhaps, for the record, correct a couple of misconceptions that maybe relayed from Dr. Ellis's intervention. One is on the. First of all, we're talking about a preamble here, so nothing has changed of the scope of the study. The work. Excuse me. I think I have the floor. Thank you. So the scope has not changed at all. So I just wanted to correct any misleading interpretation that people may have had from listening to Dr. Ellis. So this is all about the preamble and to set the context right. No one is questioning the need for some accountability here and proceeding with the study as it is clearly written out in the amended motion. The amount also, the reason also that we have concern over the leaving the preamble as is that it implies that there is 300 million that was lost, which is not true. There's a conflation there between two different figures. The amount that was unaccounted for, and I must say, Mr. Perkins described, I think, quite clearly the case, as he has obviously studied this well, and perhaps Dr. Ellis can learn from that. But therefore, the 300 million as written in the preamble is misleading. So that's the reason for just clarifying and simplifying this motion. Thanks.
Mr. Perkins?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I actually agree with Mr. Henley. The 300 million is misleading because it's more than that. It's not less. It's actually more. With 173 million spent in developing the vaccine, 150 million spent in not receiving a vaccine, in addition to the money that was invested by the Government of Canada in building the facility itself 10 years ago. So, and I'll just for the sake of a little edification, I did an OPQ on February, which the government responded to on February 7th on this issue, when I asked, with regard to the government's 173 million funding for Medicago announced in 2020, does the government or Mitsubishi Chemical Group own the intellectual property development as a result of this funding? And the government's response was, in projects supported by the Strategic Innovation Fund, which is what this was funded out of, the Crown does not have an ownership interest in the intellectual property resulting from the project, nor will the Crown acquire new rights in existing intellectual property owned or licensed. It goes on to explain how it works. So I would argue that actually the number should probably be higher in the preamble than what is in here. So I think Dr. Ellis was actually correct and knew that when he originally drafted the motion. I'd also draw attention to the end of the motion, which says calls on Medicago. I would suggest perhaps an amendment that changes that to Mitsubishi Chemical Group, because Medicago does not exist anymore. And Mitsubishi Chemical Group is the company that owns the intellectual property. And finally, to me, it's disappointing that it's only 4 hours. I don't know how you get all of these witnesses you've talked about and have any adequate examination of where, 300, 400, or $500 million actually went in 4 hours. I don't think that does justification to taxpayers in terms of getting to the bottom of this. If you guys are much better questioners than perhaps I am in the industry committee and getting this information out in little 5 minute jaunts that we get. So I also believe that it shouldn't be up to, I think you should leave yourselves open to examining what is needed in the witnesses, and then reserve the right to invite more witnesses and take the time you need to get to the bottom of this, because ultimately that should be the goal of the committee, which is to find out what happened, not limit the number of hours of which this is studied, but get the appropriate witnesses. And as we know, once you get witnesses and question them, in all likelihood it's going to lead you to more questions and perhaps some other people that we're not aware of, or companies that have been involved in this that need to examine this. And finally, any discussion around the contract, as long as everybody here is understanding that we're talking about the sort of flow of government money, including the investment in developing the vaccine and all the terms around those contracts from the Strategic Innovation Fund, and then the payments from the Strategic Innovation Fund to sign the contracts to purchase the actual vaccines. So I know I said a lot there, so at a minimum, I think it should be, I would propose an amendment, if people are acceptable to it, to make it Mitsubishi Chemical Group, that is called. It's just for accuracy. I don't know. I just,
Okay, yeah.
I'll let the rules people fix.
Mr. Burke, we've got two problems. One, you're an associate member, and so you can't move a motion. You can participate. And secondly, that amendment would be in order once we deal with the one that we're dealing with, because it isn't a sub amendment. It's an entirely different one. So the wrong person presented the amendment at the wrong time, but otherwise it's good. Mr. Johari, please.
And I know a person, just acknowledging that a member who has moved the amendment cannot amend its own amendment. What I like to suggest as a compromise is this. If we replace the word loss with the word that MP Perkins used, investment of, I'm very comfortable with this. And I actually will move the Mitsubishi as well. So I would suggest, if we all agree, that given recent media reports that the Public Health Agency of Canada investments of over $300 million government dollars on an unfulfilled contract, the committee hold up to and add the Mitsubishi to it. I'm just replacing the word lost with the word investment. That's the word that MP Perkins used, and I think that's the appropriate word. I don't know if I have to withdraw that amendment and table another amendment.
We would need unanimous consent
consent.
for you to change the words in your own amendment. Do we have
Yeah.
unanimous consent to change the word lost to investment of? We do not. Okay. Mr. Davies, are you ceding the floor now, Mr. Johari? There is no UC.
Yes.
Mr. Davies, please.
Well, a few comments. I'm not 100% sure how important the motion is. What's most important here is that we actually get the motion passed so that we can get the officials here to explain the issue. But to me, the fact that it says, given recent media reports that the Public Health Agency of Canada lost over $30 million, that's not an assertion that it did happen. It's an assertion that the media has reported that, which is a fact. So I don't really see what the import of Mr. Johari's problem with it is. I think it still allows, I mean, I think what we do know for sure, because it's been conceded, is that $150 million was spent and lost for no vaccines. That's been conceded publicly by the Public Health Agency of Canada. My understanding is about 100, and Mr. Perkins seems to have the figures quite accurately, but my understanding is that there's a further $173 million, I thought, which had been invested from a different source, a different fund, to construct the facilities that Medicago was to produce the vaccines in. And my understanding of that is that it may or may not be lost. I've read recent media reports that suggest that Mitsubishi Chemical Group is in the process of winding up the assets of Medicago. I'm not exactly sure what the legal status of Medicago is, if they're bankrupt or if they're shut down is a word that is more of a vernacular. I think they are shut down from a vernacular, but I don't know what their legal status is. There could be assets that are there to satisfy recovery of some of that. I don't know. Maybe there is, maybe there isn't. So I think I'm still I'm still not exactly sure how much of that $173 million, if any, can be recouped or not, but that's a fair question. But I don't think the motion is stating as a fact that that's lost. So I think the motion is fine the way it is, and it still gives both the Liberals and the opposition the ability to explore that without it being categorically stated in the motion in any event. I also support adding Mitsubishi Chemical Group because depending on Medicago's status, they could be bankrupt. There may not be, they could be wound up. I'm not sure what their legal status is. So it probably would be, I think if we just added Medicago / Mitsubishi Chemical Group or so that it's broad enough that we could have whoever is the operating directing mind of those assets at this point, I think that would be prudent. And I never did really hear an answer about the Auditor General, but I'm happy. I did hear from inside talk with Ms. Sidhu, who believes that the Auditor General, I know the Auditor General did write a report that looked at the way the Public Health Agency of Canada dealt with vaccines. I'm not convinced that that report specifically dealt with this issue. I think it may have gone around that, but I'm happy to have the Auditor General, tell us otherwise or appear here and explain. Thanks.
Dr. Pawlowski?
I'm personally fine with Don's suggestion that we put Medicago / Mitsubishi. The second thing is, yes, I too would like to get onto a vote so we can get on to more important things. And thirdly, just on like how many sessions and Rick's comment on having more than 2 sessions. Having just spent a couple of meetings with OGO, it was really interesting. It was a real inquisition into the ArriveCan app and who contracted with who and who subcontracted and who said what. Very different from what we're used to in Health Committee. And we have a bit of expertise on Health Committee. We have, between those of us who worked in healthcare and in people who've been on this committee for a long time, I think we do a good job at looking at medical questions. And certainly we have some big questions coming up in terms of like cancer screening in women, the opioid crisis. And so although this is a good question, and I fully welcome the transparency and what happened in this contract. However, I think it's probably best left to a committee which is used to doing that kind of work and leave us to do the things that we've done in the past, which is look into medical issues, because there is also an importance in doing that, not just looking at all the government contracts.
Dr. Hanley?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just yeah, I'm happy for this to go to a vote soon. But just for the record, two things. One is Don's question about the Auditor General. The Auditor General did review the reports and comment. Did review the contracts and make comments, and including specifically on the Medicago contract. So that's why we had suggested including the Auditor General. And the second thing, again, for the record, is just the media reports were about a loss of $150 million. I recognize that there is this total spending of over $300 million, but part of that was the investment. And I agree, we need to clarify the status of that. But it's just the accuracy of the preamble again. So that's why I wouldn't support it as written, but it's a preamble.
There are no further speakers on the list. Are we ready for the question? Okay, so what is before the committee is this, that the motion be amended to delete the words, given recent media reports that the Public Health Agency of Canada lost over $300 million on non-fulfilled contract. All those in favor of the amendment, please raise your hand. All those opposed, the amendment is defeated. Is it the will of the committee to entertain another amendment with respect to the identity of Medicago / Mitsubishi? Mr. Davies.
Yes, Mr. Chair, I would add at the very end of the motion where it says "and Medicago," perhaps we could put, I don't know if you want to put / Mitsubishi Chemical Group, or if it's better to say the Auditor General, Medicago, and Mitsubishi Chemical Group. It's probably better to do the latter.
Okay,
So I would put a comma after Auditor General, remove the and, say Medicago, and then and Mitsubishi Chemical Group, period.
everybody clear on the amendment? Is there any further discussion? All those in favor of the amendment? It's unanimous. The amendment is adopted. We are now on to the main motion as amended. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor of the motion as amended, hands please. All those in favor, all those opposed? The motion as amended is carried. The motion. All right, colleagues, the next item on our agenda is to suspend and move into camera for consideration of a couple of committee reports. Mr. Davies and then Dr. Ellis.
Well, I'm in the committee's hands. I think that it might be prudent for us to actually spend the next 20 minutes scheduling the meetings between now and Christmas. And I'm hoping that's what Dr. Ellis may be suggesting. If in the absence of that, and I would propose that we deal with the Children's Health Study before we start with the Patented Medicines Prices Review Board study, if we do have time to deal with that, mainly because we're an inch away from finishing the Children's Health Study, and we'd have to be a first look at the PMPRB. I have spoken with my colleagues, and I think there's unanimous support around, but so if we do deal with the study next, I'd move that we go to the Children's Health Study first, and I'll cede the floor and see if Dr. Ellis wants to talk about scheduling meetings.
Dr. Ellis?
Yeah, thanks.
Sounds great. Schedule some meetings, talk about the Children's Health Study. Let's get moving.
And is it the will of the committee to talk about planning future meetings in public or in camera? It's more efficient to do it in public, but it's normally done in camera.
Let's do it the efficient way.
All right. So, our calendar as it presently stands, and our calendar as previously adopted by the committee. Sorry? Oh, okay. I'm I'm just going to let me set the stage, and then I'll hand it over to you. So, the calendar that we have adopted, and there's been a whole bunch of things that have intervened since we've adopted it, which is what is, I'm sure, necessitated this discussion. But basically, we have 8 meetings. I would suggest more likely 7 meetings. 8 meetings scheduled before the Christmas recess. What had previously been agreed to was that the next 2 meetings would be meetings held in camera to deal with 3 or maybe 3 draft reports: Children's Health, Oversight of Medical Devices, and PMPRB, and that the Women's Health Study would commence on the 27th for 4 meetings, and that the study on opioid epidemic, for which I will remind you there has not yet been a motion adopted, would begin on the 11th. So that is what the committee had previously agreed to, just so that you know where we were. Now I'm open to discussion on where we should be. Dr. Kitchen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and there have been discussions around the table on looking at this, and one of the things that we think needs to be done as quickly as possible is on the issue of getting started on the women's study, and using the 6 parameters that Mr. Davies has proposed. What I would propose is that, though, because of the urgency of the Medicago issue that we're dealing with right now, that in recognition that we have 8 2-hour meetings after the break when we come back, Monday and Wednesdays, and challenging to try and get those 4 hours of the Medicago study done at the same time as getting involved with the women's study and getting it started, and doing it, staying in it instead of going in and out and in and out, at least getting a good solid base to it. That if it's possible, the discussion was about adding an extra hour to the meetings, and we've had that discussion around the table. Recognizing that Wednesdays go till 9:30 at night is really a challenge. But perhaps we could add the extra hour on the Mondays to do. And so what I'm proposing is that we start with, the first meeting would be 2 hours with Medicago. That would be the Monday, followed with, on the Wednesday, 2 hours on the women's study. The next week would be 2 hours on the women's study on the Monday and on the Wednesday. And then the next week we would go to the opioid study and do 2 hours of the opioid plus an extra hour at that time. That hopefully would give you, Chair, a chance to ensure or try and arrange for us to get that extra hour. At the same time, it would allow us to, for example, where it's a big challenge to get ministers to come on short notice, that we would have time to therefore maybe get the Minister of Health or the Minister of Innovation Sciences. And so on that point, and then the Wednesday study would be 2 hours 2 hours with the women study. And then the final Monday, we would go back to the opioid study plus the 1 hour with preferably, hopefully, a minister, et cetera, in that hour, extra hour, and then finish on the Wednesday with the women's study. At that point in time, there still would be we would need in the new year coming back to focus on the women and the opioid studies, but at least we would have a good foundation on the women's study as well as with the opioid, and as well as dealing with the issue of getting to as quickly as possible on the Medicago.
So if I understand correctly, are you proposing that we shelve the 3 draft reports until the new year?
I hadn't factored that in.
Yeah, exactly. I started looking at it on Monday. Oh, sorry, I shouldn't be talking.
Mr. Thériault?
Mr. Thériault, thank you very much for bringing that up, Chair, because I was starting to get worried because very clearly with regard to medical instruments, this is a colossal report, and I think it's essential that we at least formally adopt this report. It's we just have to have the analysts provide the text so that we can read the most recent version, so we can, I think, adopt it quite quickly. And we've waited quite a while, and women have waited a long time as well. So I think we have to deal with that. So I would suggest that at our next meeting on the 20th, we should deal with that. And if I'm not wrong, I think that we could then submit it to Parliament soon after. I think that's the number one priority for me. I think if we all do our work to prepare before coming to the committee, I think that we can deal with it in that one meeting. And I think it would be irresponsible not to do that. So I just wanted to bring that up. For all the rest, I'm very open, but not with regard to that issue. For once, we worked very well and very quickly with the consensus, and I think that the women would appreciate that on our part.
Mr. Chair, I like Mr. Torres' point because this is so confusing agenda. I think I like Mr. Torres' point. Thank you.
Mr. Davies and then Dr. Kitchen.
I'm sorry, I missed a little bit about what Ms. Terrio said, but I'm sure that I'm going to agree with the thrust of what he said, which is we want to finish at least two of the reports that are very close to being finished, which is the breast implant registry and the children's, which both have been going on for a long time. I mean,
His preoccupation was with the first one.
yes, and if I recollect, both of those are, if we have act in good faith, we can finish both reports in an hour with each, I think. So what I would propose is the only amendment I would make to the suggestion of Dr. Kitchen is on the 22nd, which is the Wednesday when you come back. We don't have to start the women's study there. We should have that meeting dedicated to the children's health study and the breast implant registry study, and endeavor to finish those two off. The PMPRB study is one that we can kick off the new year, but at least we can finish the two studies that have been done. We haven't even started the PMPRB yet, so, and it was my motion, and the issue is largely academic at this point, so that's something that can wait. Where I think the breast implant registry is something that we ought to finish, and the children's health study is over a year. I don't even want to say when we first started it. So, so that would be Medicago on Monday the 20th, finishing those two reports on the 22nd. And then the rest would be, as Dr. Kitchen has specified, women's health starting on the 27th and the 29th. December 4th would be the opioids for 2 hours, and then 1 hour of Medicago. And again, I think we do need to really clarify that we can do that extra hour on the Monday. I'm happy to do it. But I know it's a question of resources. And Mr. Chair, I raised this last meeting, and I think you very prudently exhibited some reservation on that. So I don't know if you have any more news to share with us about whether we can get an extra hour on the Monday. But assuming we can, then women's on the 6th and opioids for 2 and 1 hour Medicago on the 11th, and then women's study. And that gives us 4 women's study, 2 on the opioids. It allows us a chance to finish the 2 reports and to honor the motion we just passed today on Medicago. So I think it satisfies everybody's interest to a large degree.
Okay. So if I can summarize what I think is a consensus, that on the 20th, we will start the examination of the study that we just adopted today. So the one with respect to the advanced purchase agreements. That on the 22nd, we would meet in camera to deal with children's health and with the medical devices reports. Bear in mind, please, that the children's health report is a version 1. And so it's entirely possible. Well, once we get through version 1, there'll be a version 2 that may be able to deal with quickly and maybe not. But anyway, the 22nd will be an in-camera meeting for draft reports. The 27th would be the departmental officials on women's health. The 29th would be women's health. Your question with respect to getting an extra hour, the suggestion that's been put forward leaves us enough time to make the ask. And as soon as we have an answer, we'll let you know. So it's possible, but not guaranteed, is what I would say. So the 4th would be 2 hours of opioids and 1 hour of the advanced vaccine contracts. The 6th would be women's health. The 11th would be the same as the 4th, 2 hours on opioids, and 1 hour on advanced vaccine. And then the 13th would be on women's health. Have I?
Yeah, I agree.
Okay. So, one outstanding matter that we can deal with when appropriate. Probably the best slot is the 22nd. Is we are planning to do an opioid study for which there has not been a motion adopted. So we're going to need to set the parameters, whether it's the motion that was debated but not passed by Dr. Hanley or something else, because we've debated a few of them. So I see Dr. Hanley and Dr. Pawlowski. Dr. Hanley.
We could make this quick. I was just going to suggest that we adopt the motion that I previously brought to committee. We could endlessly debate the wording. I know that Dr. Ellis loves to play with some of the words.
Okay,
And
so there, do we have,
Agreed.
okay, there has been a motion put on notice that has been debated but not adopted. Is the will of the committee to adopt the motion of Dr. Hanley that has been put on notice in the subject of the
Can it just be
opioid
read
agreement?
quickly,
I
or-
have Mr. Davies.
Can it just be read quickly? Does anybody have it handy?
That pursuant to Standing Order 108, sorry? That pursuant to Standing Order 108, I'm just trying to get Dr. Ellis to the hockey game, okay? That pursuant to Standing Order 108 Sub 2, the committee undertake a study of the opioid epidemic and toxic drug crisis in Canada, and specifically look at the impacts of measures that are being taken and additional measures that could be taken to address the toxic drug crisis, reduce harm, and save lives. That the committee holds a minimum of 8 meetings on this study, including 1 meeting with an explicit focus on the toxic drug crisis in Indigenous, rural, northern, and remote communities, and that at least 2 meetings be conducted after September 30th, 2023, to allow for the committee to hear evidence related to British Columbia's drug decriminalization experiment. That the committee present its findings and recommendations to the House, and that the committee request a comprehensive response to the report by the government. Is there any debate on that motion? Is it the will of the committee to adopt the motion? Go ahead, Dr. Hanley.
I'm just wondering if the dates as written are still relevant, because there's a mention of December.
The only date that's mentioned in the motion is September 30th, and the only reason it's there is to say that the study, to the extent that it talks about British Columbia, should happen after that.
Oh,
So
well,
it-
that is after.
So it's fine
Okay.
because we're past it.
Right.
All those in favor of the motion is adopted unanimously. And Mr. Davies and then Dr. Ellis.
Well, just since violent agreement is breaking out this evening, I'll just keep that train running, I hope. I was just going to suggest that in order to facilitate the opioids, we generally commence every study with a report from the department, with department officials. So, and it would help the analysts, I'm sure. Why don't we slot in the report from the department on December 4th on opioids? Because that would
Meaning officials?
the officials. Pardon me, officials.
Everybody okay
And-
with that?
Yeah.
Okay.
And then let's just pick a date for getting witnesses in. Just maybe all we need to do is submit witnesses for the 11th. It's only 1 meeting, and then we can have some time to. We'll be breaking through January anyway, but if we can just agree on a date to get witnesses in for the 11th, then we can later on pick a date that we can get witnesses in for the remaining 7 meetings.
Friday of the week that we come back by noon.
Friday of the week we come back by noon. So that's the 24th at noon?
So by the 24th,
24th at noon for witnesses on the opioid, for the first tranche of witnesses on the opioid study. For the witnesses that are going to appear on the 11th, please. So the 24th.
Mr.
Okay.
Chair, I'm happy to put in, we can all put in witnesses beyond that too if we want, but
Yep.
all we really have to schedule is for the 11th. I'd
Yep.
rather get that done tonight.
So
and then
some
we can-
witnesses by
Yeah.
the 24th, please. Dr. Pawlowski.
So 2 things. One, on the opioid study, we previously had conversations about travel with that. I think this is one study which would really benefit from us finding out what other jurisdictions have done. We've already talked about Portugal. I would say Vancouver, Portland. There are other places we may want to visit. So, and I know we need to have all party agreement. So maybe the opposition can think about whether they're willing to do that and where we would want to go. And the other question was on the Medicago study. That means on Monday the 20th, we're going to have 2 hours, and with or without the ministers.
Okay, so for the 20th, we have a list of witnesses who we need to invite, and it will depend on their availability. I think there's 2 ministers on that witness list. So my expectation is whenever the ministers say they're available, that's when we'll take them, and we'll take everyone else, anyone we can get. If one or both the ministers is available on the 20th, great, and if not, we'll fill it with the rest of the list. And also travel. Travel involves quite a bit more than just agreement here. There's another level of approvals required. So if there's going to be travel, there should be some discussions held among committee members as to what it might look like, how long it might take, when it might happen, because this committee then has to make a proposal to another body in order to access those funds. So appreciate you raising the topic, but there's going to need to be some work done before we can advance that. Anything further? Dr. Ellis.
Thanks, Chair. And certainly if Dr. Pawlowski wants to submit a proposal for that, we'd love to see it, and happy to entertain that. And motion to adjourn, Chair.
Is it the will of the committee to adjourn the meeting?
Yes.
We're adjourned.
Thank you.